And we are live. You are watching another episode of the Detective Diaries. I am your host, Greg Lawson. This is where we interview strange and interesting people I find along my paranormal journey. Today we're going to be talking to Tui Snider. She's an author, a researcher, and a lecturer. And she specializes in cemetery symbology and in cemeteries in general. Last time we talked with Seth Breedlove. He is the director and owner of Small Town Monsters. He makes documentary films about strange and interesting things. Next week, we're going to be talking with Kat Ward out of Australia. She is a paranormal investigator, ghost hunter, researcher, and very knowledgeable in a more scientific approach on looking at paranormal experience. So let's go ahead and see if I can get Tui in here, and because we don't want to hear me all night long. Hey, Tui, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited. I've been catching some of the replays of your show and really enjoying it.
Yeah. I've had a lot of fun. Jeff Belanger started doing the speakeasy back, it was right at the beginning of COVID, and he was doing Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I thought, you know what? Nothing's going on Tuesday night. So I went ahead and started doing it on Tuesday night, and I've really enjoyed it. I've been able to actually connect with a lot of people that I hadn't talked to in a long time. So it's been a lot of fun. You and I know each other from Jefferson, right?
I think from the History, Haunts, and Legends. Yeah. I think we were next to each other one year.
Yeah. And we've seen each other.
We've seen each other after.
Yeah, we've seen each other over a lot over the last 4 years, I guess. I think I have an echo. Somebody sent me a message saying that I have an echo on this, so I'm going to turn this down a little bit. Can you still hear me okay?
What? No, I can't. Sorry. I shouldn't joke on a show. No.
That's good. So we spend all this time next to each other, never get to talk to each other.
But I still have so many stories interrupted. Like you'll start a story, I'll start a story, and then, of course, we get someone coming up to our table.
Right.
Mysterious echo, go away.
I'm going to try to figure out what's going on with my echo, but I'm going to let you talk. These are some of your books that
a peek there.
That you've written, and the cool thing about it is I rely on a lot of different people whenever I'm doing my investigations, and I'll contact them, and you're one of those people, except I don't have to contact you because I have your book. So I'm going to let you talk, and I'm going to try to figure out my echo. So if you would, well, how did you get into doing these the cemetery symbolism? What got you into that?
Oh, all right. Well, actually, I was doing some research, and I love cemeteries. I've loved them since I was a kid. I even, there was a historic cemetery when I lived in Virginia that may have saved my life, because this creepy guy tried to kidnap my friend and I when we were 9 years old. And because we played in the cemetery so much and ran through the cemetery, which you should never do, but when you're a kid, you don't know these things. And luckily, this old man was chasing us, he already locked us in a room and tried to kidnap us, and we escaped by jumping out a window. It was like a ground floor window. It was still a little bit of a hop, whatever. But we were walking home. He tried to get us. Luckily, we knew our way through that cemetery, and we just tore through it, zigzagging, and he could not keep up with us. So I guess you could say my fondness for them goes back to me being 9 years old. But even beyond that, not just playing with them and playing in them, I found myself really interested in the history. And I was looking up something about here in Texas. My first book is called Unexpected Texas. And I should say that my writing as a writer, I started out as a travel writer. And so my first book was actually a guide to offbeat and overlooked places here in Texas. And it's called Unexpected Texas. I actually do include a ghost story in there. I include a ghost story that involves Steven Spielberg in there. But the book's focus is primarily not paranormal. One of the topics in this book was the Jesus in cowboy boots, which is a monument in Paris, Texas, that's become quite a tourist attraction. And I was talking to different people, and I was trying to find some information about why Jesus would be wearing cowboy boots. And I came across a lot of misinformation online, especially, and in forums where people should have maybe known a little better. And they were people sometimes, this happens a lot, when they don't really know what something means, they kind of make something up for what it means. And a good example is on his monument. You know, he's wearing the cowboy boots, but he also has upside down torches. And I already knew that that was a Christian symbol from visiting some historic cemeteries in England. And it's the Victorian era, especially, they like to play with the idea of, you know, the upside and then the upside down being representing death. And so an upside down torch shows that the soul, you know, the eternal flame of your soul is still burning in the afterlife. So it's a way of saying eternity, the eternal life. But people were saying in some of these forums, and even people I met in person, I was asking them, they're like, oh, we think he was an atheist. You know, that meant he was like, I'm like, that is not even true. Let's not slander people or make something up about a symbol that we don't need. So that's a very long-winded way of saying, I hope your echo got fixed.
I don't know.
Well, so I wanted a book like this. I was like, why isn't there? I've got a field guide to, you know, wildflowers, and I got a field to bird guide. Why isn't there some sort of field guide to cemetery symbols that I can just kind of flip through and when I'm out and about researching? Because one thing for historic research, if there's 2 ways or 3 ways to spell someone's last name, I will go with what's on the tombstone. You know, if I can't find the way to spell it. So I ended up, long story short, or long story longer, I guess I can go on and on. But I wrote the book because it was the book I wanted. It was that old cliche, right? The book you want to read. Well, I wanted a book. Most books about symbols, you know, my book, I purposely made it this size so you can put it in your glove box or a purse. Most books, I have so many books on symbolism, and if you drop them, you would break a toe. I mean, they are huge, and they cover, like, you know, they're these big epic books that are great for, you know, killing a bug or something, but right. you're not going to carry that with you when you're out and about. And they didn't just focus on the cemetery. And I thought, you know, cemeteries, like I say over and over, I say they are like open air museums, and that's something I say again and again. And so I wanted something people could carry with them. And one of the things that made me really happy was I was at History, Haunts, and Legends, and this lady came up to my table and rather sheepishly pulled out this copy of my book, and it was all banged up. I mean, it had dirt and rips and, like, you know, Post-it notes all over, and she flipped through it. There was like highlighter. And she wanted me to sign it, but she was like blushing because she's like, I'm so sorry, it's in bad shape. And I'm like, no, you were who I was daydreaming about when I wrote it. I pictured this book, you know. She goes, I travel for work, and whenever I see that little green cemetery sign like we have here in Texas, I just pull over and I look, and she goes, I take your book now because I can find out what different things mean. And I'm like, that is exactly what I was picturing. I don't want this book to just hang out on a shelf, you know. Right. I mean, it's okay if it does, but it really makes me happy when it gets out and about.
Yeah, I use mine, but mine definitely does stay at home. I think I'm probably got a little bit more of an echo. I can't figure this thing out.
Man,
I'm not sure what's going on.
Sorry about that.
But I will try to speak as little as possible.
Oh, I see Kat Ward in the comments. Hi, Kat. She's down under. I'm sorry to oblige. I'm sorry. I just love accents. I'm probably mangling yours.
Lynn actually wanted to ask you about your Santa Claus.
Yeah,
that's. Let me see if I can pull it up
the
here.
Santa Claus bank robbery book.
Yeah.
Yeah, that book. Yeah, that's like a less than heartwarming tale for the Christmas season, because spoiler alert, Santa gets lynched at the end. And this is true history. This was like my foray into true crime. This is whole crazy. This is one reason that I often joke that I used to write fiction, but then I moved to Texas, because this is such a crazy tale. In the 1920s, there were actually a lot of bank robberies happening every single day in Texas. There were, 3 to 5 every day. And the Texas Bank Association got concerned, and they thought, hey, maybe we could have a dead bank robber reward. So they made posters, and they say dead bank robber reward, not that wanted dead or alive stuff you always see in the movies. And even on the poster it says, we'll pay $5,000 for each bank robber killed in the act of robbing the bank, and not a penny for any live ones. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? Just got to shoot someone while they're committing a crime. Of course, there were cases where, somebody's just told, hey, Joe, hold this bag, stand in front of the bank, and then they try to collect. I mean, there was all sorts of stuff. So that kind of sucked me into it. And that was part of it. But then when I heard that the biggest manhunt to date in up to 1927 in Texas was for none other than Santa Claus, and it had Frank Hamer of Bonnie and Clyde fame, and all these famous Texas Rangers and stuff. It was a huge manhunt, and it was for a guy who dressed up like Santa and had a gang, and they robbed a bank. And because of that reward, people got very excited, and they either ran to the bank thinking, great, $5,000 a pop, I'm going to shoot me a bank robber, or they ran from the bank. And I got some really great quotes in the book. Every quote I have was something either from a court transcript or from a newspaper or an interview. And like I got one quote from a guy, I love his name. His name is Goober Keys. And he was a teenager. And while the bank robbery was going on, the local hardware store was handing out rifles loaded to people, saying, go get yourself a bank robber, son. Shoot him up, make $5,000. So, but the problem was these were the newfangled ones they were selling for Christmas. And so people didn't know quite how to do them. People were shooting off toes and shooting each other and shooting off the ceiling. Not a lot of bank robbers getting shot. It's just a crazy tale. It's not funny, and yet it is this comedy of errors that kind of goes through it. And I have even a quote from the guy, now I'm blanking on his name. He wrote Conan the Barbarian, Robert E. Howard, and a correspondence that he had. He was friends with H.P. Lovecraft, and they talk about it in the letter to each other, so I share that in the book. But the best part of all is I discovered a player who got off. I discovered a mysterious blonde who's been left out of the official record, who I'm just, appalled that she did not get caught. So it's a crazy tale. I thought I was just going to write a magazine article, and my research kept going and going until it became a book.
Yeah, just out here in Central Texas, it's kind of the same way. Just absolutely crazy tales. You don't need fiction. You can just do what the people were doing.
No.
I got a question. What's maybe the top 5 symbols that you see that people have in graveyards? What's probably the top 5? I don't know.
All right, top 5 cemetery symbols. There's a good video idea I should do. I do have a YouTube channel, and I do share a lot of information there.
Well, I'm assuming there would be angels.
Of course, and angels come in all sorts of flavors. And one thing about angels that people often don't think about is to look at their feet. They are nearly always barefoot. And that's just to symbolize the humility. They're down to earth. And there's a lot of symbols. One thing I like to explain to people is that symbols aren't meant to just be, all esoteric and like hard to guess. They have a reason for it. Like one that is very common symbol, actually, that's easy to overlook, I think, is ivy. And you see like ivy engraved. Well, think about ivy. Ivy stands for friendship. Well, think of ivy. It clings to things. So ivy is like that friend who clings to you through thick and thin. So there's a reason for it to symbolize stuff. They didn't just willy-nilly, I don't think this should mean this, and I think that should mean that. So that's one. One that I like to bring up this time of year is the pentacle, that's upside down pentacle. And that's people, I get at least once a year, I get an email from someone who's concerned that, was my grandma a witch? No. She was your grandpa, I'll say, was he in the Masons? Yeah, grandpa was a Mason. Okay, well, grandma, that upside down pentacle, that stands for the Order of the Eastern Star. But what's great about it is the acronym inside the rays of the star. It spells fatal, which sounds so dire. But it stands for fairest among 10,000, altogether lovely. Oh, not so bad now. But I mean, thanks to Hollywood, I got to say, Hollywood, Hollywood you see a pentacle, and I just instantly groan and roll my eyes because in a movie it's like shorthand for like witch,
Right.
but in a gravehand, graveyard, it means, hey, she was a member of the Order of the Eastern Star, and she, which is the female section of the Masons. Which so Masonic symbols are very common. Have I said 5 yet?
No, and I'm gonna put you at it because the thing that was really interesting to me as a kid was going into cemeteries. My brother got me involved in that.
Oh, neat.
And we would walk around, and I would see all this symbolism, but of course, I just thought it was cool art.
Yeah.
And now we had talked before about certain organizations and certain people would buy a life insurance policy, and depending on how much the life insurance policy was, they actually put your tombstone. And so if it was a really cheap life insurance policy, you got a little bitty tombstone. If it was a very expensive one, you obviously got a big one. That was the woodsman, right?
Yeah, there's no S in it, though. It's Woodman of the world. But yeah, that is one of many. So I'm just going to back up a second and say that in the late 1800s and in the 1800s in general, there weren't a lot of social services. And so there were over 2,000 different clubs and organizations in America. So I had a heyday researching this and just trying to narrow it down for things that are pretty common that you'll see in the book. Of those 2,000, a lot of them have gone, by the wayside. One of my favorites, and I really wished they had a cemetery symbol, was called the Order of the Big Dogs. And to be and the big dog, you had to play a musical instrument to be a member, and you had to weigh over 200 pounds. And it was primarily a drinking club, and they called their meeting place a kennel, and they had like a woof woof, greeting. It just sounded so crazy. But at the same time, there was a guy named Joseph Cullen Root, and there are all sorts of puns involved in this whole Woodman of the World thing. He created the Woodman of the World, and which they still exist now. I think the Woodman of the World, I pass by them. Now I notice them when I'm in towns. That still exists. I think there's even a movie where Jack Nicholson stars as someone at a Woodman of the World convention. The name escapes me. And maybe it's As Good as It Gets. I don't know. Now I'll have to look that up. But that was one of the reasons you would want to be a member. You would want to be a woodman. And they make these tremendous tree stones. Now, a tree stone, you can see one that isn't a Woodman of the World. And that does happen, especially with babies or young kids. You will see that. You'll see like a little stump with like 2 branches, and that stands for their family tree, essentially. And then the mom and dad are the branches, and their life was cut short. That's why it's a stump. You'll see little tree stumps.
Gotcha.
They're very heartbreaking. But these Woodmen of the World ones can be really grand. So they'll have quite a large tree stump. I've seen some that look just like a tree. I mean, it fakes you out from a distance. You think it's a dead tree over there, and you walk over. Sometimes they're just a stack of logs, but there's always sort of that wood theme to them. No, they had several splinter groups. Sorry for the pun again. Sorry, not sorry. But anyway, so there's modern woodmen. There's Woodmen of the World. There's the little variations they had along on it. But they always, you can tell it's a woodman if it says, and I don't really speak Latin, but it says Dum tacet clamat on it. You'll see that symbol, that phrase, and that means though silent, he speaks. And these tree stones, they will often have other things, like they will have a calla lily to let you know they were married. They will have a fern. A fern stands for humility because it grows in the shade. It's not out there hogging the sunshine. So that's one thing I love about the symbols. So there you go.
That's awesome. No, that's really cool because I look at these things because that's what Lynn and I do. I mean, whenever we go to another town, we go to try to find the oldest cemetery or the most interesting cemetery.
My kind of people.
Yeah, we've been to cemeteries in Transylvania. One of our favorite is in Sigishwara. It's a citadel town, and it's absolutely amazing.
Wow.
And then in London, there's
Highgate and Kensal Green.
Yeah,
there's
amazing.
the Magnificent Seven is what they call them, because there was let me talk about garden cemeteries for a second. In the 1800s, there really weren't garden cemeteries. People were buried in the churchyard. or they in church. If they donated a lot, they were going to be married. I mean, not married, buried close to the altar, maybe under the pews. Now, I have heard that that's where the phrase "stinking rich" comes from. I don't know if that's true or not, but I love that idea.
That makes complete sense.
I won't until I verify that. It's just too good not to say, to share.
Right.
It's good, but there was a real pecking order to where you were buried. You wouldn't. And if you committed suicide, you might not be buried in the churchyard at all, or they might put your body they wouldn't put you through the gate, but they might lift your body over the back fence and bury you somewhere. So needless to say, this is a finite thing. You're stacking bodies, and eventually a big rain comes, and I've read accounts where the bodies were spilling into the streets because the church wall couldn't hold them anymore. And even though they didn't have a real sense of germs back then, they did know that a bad odor, they had that whole idea of bad odor, they knew this was not hygienic, long story short. And so the first people to really deal with this seriously were in France, and that's where that big famous cemetery in Paris, Père Lachaise, which I have not been to. It's killing me that I haven't been there. I really want to go someday.
We went,
but
yeah.
Oh, I'm so jealous. But so that was designed. That was designed to be a park where you could go and wander through it, and that inspired the people in Mount Auburn in the East Coast to create. Outside of Boston, they were like, we're having that same issue, so let's create a garden cemetery. Well, they created this gorgeous Mount Auburn. I have not been there either. It's killing me again. I've seen so many pictures. This is truly a garden cemetery. Where these meandering paths, people might go there on the weekend. They would hunt for game. They would set up easels. They would do everything that we do in a public park today, because these were America's first public parks. They just happen to have dead people. And they might even give you, I've seen these pamphlets they would give you to suggest which plants you might grow at your plot. So you were encouraged to garden at your plot, which you're not, in modern cemeteries. And that's a whole other story too, why we're not allowed to do that anymore. But so now I forgot why I was going off on this whole garden cemetery plot. I was going somewhere with this.
It's fascinating. So why are they not allowed to garden today?
Oh, well, okay. Let's see. Sorry, my husband walked by and it just distracted me. So why? Well, all right, that gets up to, basically, we can sort of blame it on, in a nutshell, on the Great Depression, because people had to move away for work. Now, here in Texas, I still see a lot of country burial grounds where, my big tip, when you first go into a cemetery, look around for signs. And there might be a thing that'll say Decoration Day or Homecoming Day, annual, third Sunday in May. It'll have like April and May. There'll be some time in the spring, because that's when everybody's flowers are growing. That's why we have Memorial Day that time of year as well, because, you could go to the florist in the day. You brought your own flowers.
Right.
So people would come, and it was considered, it was called all day singing and in the grounds. It was another name for it. The long story short, I keep saying that. I don't know why I keep saying long story short. Sorry. It's my phrase today. But people would come and they would tend the grounds. They would, clean it up. Actually, here in Texas, they would usually scrape up all the grass, so there wasn't any grass growing. Because back then, people didn't have lawn mowers. They didn't even develop lawn grasses until the 1930s. So the whole idea of lawns was not a thing. That's one thing I love about it. We look at the past through the lens of today, and we don't realize how different. Their idea of grass was like, oh, yuck, grass, that's going to attract bugs and maybe cattle or something's going to trample the grounds. Let's not attract, and let's be able to see if there's a snake there, So it was a different idea. Well, people used to do this and tend their local cemetery. Well, when families dispersed and had to travel other places to find jobs, then a lot of these places fell into disarray. And if they were bought up and became like a privatized cemetery, it was much easier for them to, add lawn grasses, try to get flat monuments, not some nice monument, something you could mow right over. So it
Right.
just, the whole thing changed from where it was a place to come and personalize. I mean, they would put as much into it as we do to our yards. You drive down a neighborhood and everyone's got different foliage in their yard. That's kind of how it was expected to be in the garden cemeteries. You drive, or well, ride your buggy through them, or walk through them, and you were going to see the personality that, oh, this person likes these flowers, and we planted these, particular roses because Aunt Jacinda liked them. There was a lot more personality in that regard.
So today, people typically don't do that because of rules of the cemetery, or
Yeah, rules are the reason. But it really varies from cemetery to cemetery. I love to go look and see what their rules are. Some will say no fake flowers. Some will say, you can, no glass vases. But some won't have any rules. And I actually wrote a book earlier this year, which I just have in ebook form, and it's called Grave Goods, because it really explains the items that people leave at the grave sites. These are, how sometimes you go and you'll see a teddy bear, or you'll see a book, or you'll see bouquets of flowers. Those are called grave goods. And it really varies. There's a lot of cultural beliefs behind it. And once again, I wrote that book because I was getting, a couple angry emails, and when I would give talks, people would have misconceptions about it. Like, they'd be like, why would people leave garbage? And this has been an ongoing thing, not just with me. You look at the back, you do historic research, and you can see that people have certain cultural beliefs. They thought you should leave a broken clock at a grave. Well, someone walking by is going to see a broken clock sitting on a grave and just think that's garbage. Well, there's a cultural belief behind it. It's not always that someone's just littering. And sometimes there are cultures that a lot of them believe, leave an empty beer can. That's not meant to be garbage, So I was just trying to explain that a little bit, and that's why I wrote that ebook about that, to hopefully clarified a bit.
No, that's pretty cool, because a lot of people do think that.
Yeah.
They look at it, especially like some of the voodoo stuff in New Orleans and everything. You see what looks to be trash, and it's more along the lines of gifts to the book. So in all of your all of your research, all the time you spent in cemeteries, so you got crosses, you got
crosses are amazing. There are over 300 kinds of crosses. Did you know? And they all have, like, each cross will have like 4 different names for the same cross. And so, because it depends on which, they have different historic significance. So it's like, oh my gosh. So for my chapter on crosses, I realized, wow, this is a lot bigger topic, but I just tried to keep it to the main type of crosses you will see. But one thing to keep in mind when you see crosses is a lot of times at the base of the cross, you'll see little steps going up the side. They're nearly always 3 steps, and that's to symbolize the Trinity. So they're just interesting things like that. But yeah, even crosses, you can go off on a whole rabbit trail on that.
Yeah. I spent a ton of time in some of the graveyards over in Ireland.
Oh, neat.
The Celtic cross is just absolutely amazing. All of them original pieces of art.
Wow.
So angels, crosses, pentagrams, Satan thing you said, right?
Yeah. And I should say, you mentioned angels, and it kind of made me think, because angel identification is fun. I have a little section in my book to help you ID different angels. And, Saint Gabriel's pretty easy because he's got a horn to blow on Judgment Day. But it is, angel identification is fun. Father Time usually has a beard that he's twiddling. He can look a bit like a cool hipster dude. Yeah. But yeah, angel identification is fun. But also what the angels are doing, or statues, what they're doing with their hands. I like the things too that you can walk right by. One of my favorites is like a hand by the neck. That can actually stand for martyrdom. So it might be saying this saint was martyred. And that's kind of like, so it's like a subtle thing a symbol that we might not notice. Another one would be if the hand's down here more on the chest, that's sort of a demure way of saying charity, because it's to symbolize, and it'll be a female, nursing a baby. So they're little things that you can just walk by and you think it's just a stylist. Like you were saying, you see these things, you think, oh, that's beautiful art, which it is. And like I say, these are open air museums, but it is kind of like when you learn about an old painting and then you find out all the symbols behind it and maybe some cheeky little thing that the painter added because he was, making fun of his benefactor. It's a bit like that with, it's just like that with cemetery statuary as well. There's all sorts of a whole world of intriguing layers upon layers. And what I love, and I was telling you this before we got on air, was that, this is a topic I never tire of because it just goes on and on and on. It's not, you don't just go, oh, I'm done, I learned it all. And now some of the cemeteries that I go back to that I thought at one time, we have some cemeteries that I'm like, I haven't been to that one in a while because, maybe it's not as exciting. Maybe it's a little boring as some of the other cemeteries. I'll go in there and I will have learned something. And, it's kind of like, you learn how to identify the plants in your yard. And suddenly you realize there's so much more there that I was just like, woof, going right by. Another point that I want to mention too while I'm on a roll here that I do think is interesting because sometimes, I get a lot of people just wondering why I'm interested in this topic and they think I must be really morbid. I'm not, because number one, cemeteries are for the living. That was like an epiphany I had one day. I realized everyone, yes, this is where the dead go, but they are there to console us and to teach us the living. They're there to offer us the beauty of being outside. That Mount Auburn has actually achieved arboretum status. There are many, even little country burial grounds, you will see plants that are antique plants. You will see antique roses. So there's just so much to be learned and gained, I think. And it's a great way to get outside, be quiet. You can't, you're not going to be scrolling your phone when you go through a cemetery. I think it's a really good way to unplug and learn about history.
Yeah, I wish more people would spend time in cemeteries. They should have picnic tables and stuff like that to get people to come in there because I think we would probably take care better of a lot of them. Speaking of which, you did some work up in the Oakwood Cemetery in Dallas. Is that right?
Oh no, Fort Worth probably.
Fort Worth.
I have a joke about Oakwood. I say it's the John Smith of cemetery names.
Okay.
Because there's I bet if someone's listening, they're like, I've got an Oakwood in my town. And
that's our main cemetery in Austin. Is Oakwood Cemetery. Yeah.
It's the John Smith.
I wonder what that's all about. I don't know. But
sure.
Let's get. I'm gonna hold you to those five. We got angels, we got crosses, we got pentagrams, we have ivy, and we got one more. We need one more.
Where to go? There's so many fun stuff. These fairly common ones, right?
Yeah.
The compass and the square for the Masonic.
Okay.
I mentioned the hands. That was kind of symbolic,
Yeah,
and
a lot of the hands are in different positions that show different things, correct?
Yeah, like, Manus Dei, this is Latin, for the hand of God. And these three fingers, once again, the Trinity. Ta-da, ta-da. And, this one is one of my favorites.
The two stock. Yeah. Live long and prosper together.
That's exactly, yeah. I've seen it like this. I've seen it usually it's kind of ish like this. Those are the Kohanim or hands of Cohen. Those people, they'll either have the last name Cohen or they will have, but they've definitely descended from the tribe of Cohen. And so Leonard Nimoy, being Jewish, when he was developing the character of Spock, Gene Roddenberry asked him for like a hand sign, and he remembered seeing that at his synagogue, people doing that. Now, the interesting thing is if you are a member of the tribe of Cohen, you're not supposed to attend funerals in general, just unless it's a very close family member, for what it's worth. But he came up with that because of his Jewish heritage. So I thought that was kind of cool. But you will see that at Jewish cemeteries.
Yeah. What about the direction? You see a lot of like a hand with a direction.
Yeah, the sideways thing, I'm not sure what right or left means. When you see, if people want to know about hands, by the way, this is, if you think you're interested in cemetery symbols, this is sort of like the gateway symbol, because most of us have had hands at one time in our life. And so I would say go to my website, and if you sign up for my newsletter and which I send out every Sunday. I mean, you can always unsubscribe, but you will get my book, which is just a little PDF booklet that just goes over some common hands, symbols that you will see in historic cemeteries. And I made this because this is how I got my husband interested in the topic. He wasn't as keen on the symbology as I was at first, but I started pointing out the different hands. So yeah, one thing is like you see a hand pointing up, and that's like to say, you know, one going up. And sometimes it'll be holding a flower. Now, when you see any sort of flower, pay attention to what stage of life it's in. So if you see a little bud, like a broken rosebud in a flower, you know, a hand holding that, that's probably a very young child because it's just a little bud. If you see a rose that's in the full bloom of adulthood, then that's an adult. Often it's a female because roses and the Mother Mary are associated. But so from a distance, you could kind of guess whether you're going to see, just from the symbol, like whether that was an infant or an adult, or so with plants in general. Now, when you see a hand pointing down, you might get a little nervous because a hand pointing up means, you know, one coming up to heaven. Hand pointing down, oh no. It is still a bit dire. It doesn't mean you've gone to hell, but it means that the fickle finger of fate intervened and you died suddenly. So maybe there was an accident. So if you're doing some research, you might be like, oh, this person experienced a sudden death. Like a woman who died in childbirth in the full bloom of her adulthood, there might be a hand pointing down holding a rose, a full rose. And flowers in general stand for the life's fleeting beauty. But each, you know, there was that whole language of flowers, and the different flowers can mean different things as well. So,
Gotcha. Lynn's asking, is there a rhyme or reason for the pebbles or stones arranged at grave sites, or is it simply decoration?
No, that is a very common form of grave goods. In fact, that's the only grave goods you're going to see in a Jewish cemetery. And whether you're Jewish or Christian, when you leave a stone at a grave site, that stands for, there's a verse in the Bible, Genesis 13, verses 19 and 20. That's where Jacob was at the tomb for Rachel, and he built a tomb in her honor. So when you leave a little rock at a headstone or a grave site, you are symbolically honoring your loved one. You're building a tomb in their honor, but the way it is to give them honor, to honor them. Now, like I said, in a Jewish cemetery, that's the only grave good you're going to see. But in other cemeteries, you'll see all sorts of stuff. You'll see coins too. And
well, that's an interesting thing because, like in the old Oakwood Cemetery in Austin, there's two. I think there's two Jewish sections. They're completely separate from the Christian section. And I always wondered, is that because the Christians made them be separate, or they wanted to be separate?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, these bigger cemeteries, people do, just as in life, they often kind of cling to their own. You know, when I love it, like our Oakwood in Fort Worth, we have got there's a Catholic section, and it's got its own gate. There's a Protestant section, it's got its own gate. There's the African American section, it's got its own gate. But it's grown and merged over time, and they've just ended up being one big graveyard or one big cemetery. And that happens over and over. They try to, we're just going to have the Methodists here, just have the, you know, Episcopals here. And everyone tries, but then, you know, you run out of room. And I just kind of like the idea that, you know, y'all have to get along eventually anyway. You're all going to merge. But yeah, I do see that a lot.
Out of your experiences in cemeteries, has anything strange ever happened while you're there?
Oh, I've had a few things. You're talking paranormal?
Sure.
We could go there. Okay, I was really resistant to the idea. I know it's funny because I have a whole book. Actually, I have a book. I'll show you. I have a travel guide to haunted places in Texas. And these are places you can actually go because, you know, Greg and I go to these paranormal conferences and people buy the ghost hunting equipment and then they're like, where do I go? And then, you know, you're writing a list for them of places they can visit. So I thought I will make a travel guide of places that are open to the public where you can go and politely have you know, investigate ghosts. And so I'm all about that and I enjoy paranormal investigations. For some reason, I think it's because I enjoy going to cemeteries year round. I thought, you know, that's the last place, literally, that I can imagine being haunted. I get a haunted theater. I understand a haunted business owner coming back to the business you love. But why, unless you're me and you go to cemeteries all the time? I could see me haunting a cemetery, but why would you haunt a cemetery? So I just was resistant to it. But then I heard children giggling in a cemetery. I was with my friend Teal, and it was like 9 a.m, and Teal Gray is a psychic.
Teal Gray, you heard that because she was there with you. That's why.
Yeah, well, she was on another end. Well, she can always. Here's the funny thing about Teal: she can always tell if I've been to a cemetery that day. Like, I walked into her office one day, and she's like, "Tui, where have you been? You were just at a cemetery, weren't you?" I'm like, "What? Why?" And she goes, "You have a little posse of ghost children around you again." Because every time, apparently, when I go to cemeteries, I collect children's spirits, and she's not the only psychic who's told me that over the years. Like, I'm not aware of it for whatever reason. I love children, and I am the one who sits at the, kids' table at Thanksgiving. I mean, I do hang out with them in general anyway, the living, but I was not aware of this propensity. So she, and she just jokes with me about it, but I've tested her on it. Like, I have been like, I'm not going to tell her I was just over at Argyle Cemetery, and then I'll go see her, and she'll just be like, "Oh, I got to clear you a little before you come in. You can't come in." I'm like, "Oh man, busted again." So yeah, she said we were over in Mineral Wells, which, by the way, Mineral Wells, Texas has got the most bang for your paranormal buck of a lot of places I've been to. I've had so many experiences there. I've seen like weird, naked to the eye, like orbs and things. I've gotten EVPs, etc. there. But I was not prepared for this. It was 9:30 in the morning. We had just been at all night at the Crazy Water Hotel for a paranormal investigation. We're real tired, but I wanted to go to the cemetery, me being me. And it was a beautiful day. And she goes, "Hey, go over and read that epitaph." I'm like, all right. I go over, and it's this German guy, Richard Dykerhoff. I'm like, all right. I look down, and the epitaph says, "The orphan's true friend." And I'm like, wow, that is so cool. So I'm taking a picture of it. And as I'm taking a picture, I hear like little kids like, tee, like giggling. And it's not just in my head. I hear it. I also had this weird little flash of like kids. I could see them in my head. But I stand up and I look over to where the tree would be. Well, you know where this is going. Nothing there. Just chills. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Teal. So I would love to go back and of course I didn't have my camera going. Not my camera. I didn't think to take pictures immediately because I was still really honestly looking for actual flesh and blood kids. And I didn't have my tape recorder. I would like to go back. That would have showed up on a tape recorder. That was not even, that was something else. So I kind of had to eat crow. She teases me about that. So I'm like, okay, yes, there are haunted cemeteries. And in fact, I just made a video of 13 top haunted videos in North Texas, places I've all been to that all have. And I share some stories that readers have shared with me that they've had, some really interesting ones. I also share a photo. I'd be really curious for people to weigh in on it. I've only taken like 3 anomalous photos in my life out of the thousands of photos I've taken. One was featured on Coast to Coast AM. This other one, I shared it for the first time, I think. Well, I shared it in my book, Paranormal Texas, but it's easier to see in my video. It's just a picture. There's this weird column of something, lights going through it that's transparent, but not entirely. I don't know what it was. I just had a weird feeling and took the picture when I took it. And then, later on when I was downloading photos, I went, oh, yeah, I don't know.
So, yeah, I've been to a lot of cemeteries, and I've had that creepy feeling. I haven't had the experience that a lot of other people have had. And I got to say, Mineral Wells is something's going on up there.
That's just, woo.
Yeah. So in Delvin Blythe asked, have you seen Babyland? Just for babies.
Yes, I do see Babyland sections, and yeah, in general. Okay, so in general, when I go to a cemetery, I want to go to historic ones where like the most recent burial was from 50 or 75 years ago, so I can feel like everyone from that timeline would be dead, and I'm just walking through history at that point, right? But even then, when I see a whole bunch of infant graves, it tugs, at my heartstrings. And there's some cool modern cemeteries too where I've been to, and I've been to ones where they have the Babyland sections. I can think of several where I've been to. There's one in Garland that has so many toys all throughout it, as grave goods. And Yeah, that's hard for me to walk through. I'm empathetic, I guess, and I get teary eyed. It's
Yeah.
just it's hard. That loss is so tough. But yeah, I do see those. Yeah, I do.
There are a lot of people that don't realize that a lot of cemeteries, different times of the year, will actually have events and have people come in and do things. So mostly, around Halloween, October. But I found a picture online of you here, and that's at a cemetery event, right? Tell us something about this.
Oh my gosh! First off, please let's take a moment to admire these men's mustaches. That is a year-round commitment to being historical. I tell you, that's not just like, hey, I'm going to do something this weekend. So, so there's the North Fort Worth Historical Society, which I have since joined, and they are wonderful. And what they do, these two gentlemen are members, and every year, except this one, and I think you know why, they have the Oakwood Saints and Sinners Cemetery Tour. And in that picture there, what they do is they bring to life several notable residents of the cemetery. One lady even played her own ancestor one year. If you want to see some video clips of that, I do actually have that's another one of my most recent videos, because as a consolation for them not having it this year, I put together a video because it was just too sad not to go. But these men here, they are actually showing me how to play the card game Pharaoh. So let me back up a bit. When you come, this is a very well attended, like hundreds of people come to this, and they have several tours throughout the day. And while you're waiting to take your tour, or after your tour, you can chat with me and other people who have their tables set up under the trees. And one of the things, one year, these guys had that set up, and they were teaching people how to play Pharaoh, which is spelled F-A-R-O, which I did not know is what they're actually playing. Like when you watch a Wild West show, a movie or something, and they're in the saloon and they got the card game, they're most likely playing Pharaoh, not poker. They said, yeah, poker was not as popular. And it's this really weird game. Like there's like a lion and like he had this weird lion ring on, and they knew all about it. It was really fun. So yeah, that's what's going on there. But I learned so much from that event every year, and I do feature several of the stories that I've learned from that Oakwood Saints and Sinners. I actually have a few of them in my book, 6 Feet Under Texas, because this is just all about really interesting stories that you can fun cemeteries to go to and some interesting historic.
Now, 6 Feet Under Texas is your new one, correct?
Yes.
So what spurred you to do this particular one, and how is it different than your symbology books?
Oh, okay. Well, this one, my editor told me I had a chapter about strange and unusual graves in my cemetery symbol book. And just a second. Hey, Lair, that's kind of loud. Thanks. Oh, well, I do have a husband, so. Anyway, but my editor said, you know what, this is its own book. And I realized, he was right, because I just, every time I come across a really unique, historic, famous, infamous grave, and I do the research behind it, like I want to tell its story, but I just didn't have time to put it in a chapter, and it ended up being its own book. So like I have, the guy who played Chewbacca, he's buried just about 5 minutes away from where I live, which was a shocker. It's Peter Mayhew. I have, of course, I talk about Bonnie and Clyde in here, but I don't talk about their whole life. What I'm focused on is what the unknown facts about what happened with their bodies afterwards. Like they were taken to a furniture store afterwards, after they were ambushed, things like that. And I explain the reason why. And I go into a lot of detail about things. I focused a lot of the stories that I chose in here are stories that kind of illustrate how things have changed. Because it's easy, like I said, again, when we look at history, it's easy to look through the eyes of today and make all sorts of assumptions. But what would seem macabre and weird to us now was actually might be commonplace 100 years ago, and maybe vice versa. Like a great example I like to give is that nowadays everybody has ID. And even if I did travel to Fort Worth and just dropped dead and had left my ID at home, there's dental records, there's DNA, there's CCTV. I mean, there's so many different ways to track people down. 100 years ago, you and your family go traveling 40 miles away from home, or you're a traveling salesman even. I have examples of that. You drop dead for some reason. You don't have any ID. Well, I don't know, depending on who you are. A lot of people didn't have ID. I have an example of a family of 7. They still don't know who they were. But this one thing they might do is they might set your body in a shop window, like a furniture store window usually, in a chair, and just hope someone walks by and goes, oh, hey, that's Carl, Now, I love explaining that when I give live, like in-person talks, because a lot of times the audience will gasp. And I've gotten so used to it now that I've done so much research. But at first I was like, oh, this is crazy. But then after the 3rd or 4th, I'm like, oh, that's what they did.
I hope that's what Lynn does with me.
Oh my God. I know, just sitting there. I know one guy, they sat him in a chair and then they embalmed his dog and the dog was dead. They didn't kill it. So yeah. And then nobody identified him, and they ended up, his mummy ended up traveling around America for 60 years. And then it ended up in somebody's estate sale, essentially, like a relative found it. And she kept it in her basement for a few years. And then it just keeps getting weirder and weirder. Then they finally buried it. And Don McLean, who wrote, Bye, Bye, Miss American Pie.
Oh, okay.
He found out about it, and he wrote a song about it. So I've got all that in there. So that's the kind of crazy tale I've got in my crazy tales, that I've got in my book.
Hopefully they'll do that with me. I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, that's festive anyway.
Be in a traveling road show. That would be good.
Being in yeah.
So Kat from Australia would like to know, have you studied any Eastern versus Western religious differences in cemeteries and burials?
I have a bit. I'm not as well versed. I'm definitely got a lot of Catholic, Protestant, and I'm branching out, learning more about the Jewish. But I do have visited, I visited Bruce Lee's grave. Mm-hmm. And so one thing they do is they will have, now I'm forgetting which way it goes. You know how people will buy their headstones before they pass away, and they'll just have them sitting there, and it might have their birth date, but not their death date. Well, if you can tell if the person's alive or dead, because it'll be red if they're alive, and then I think white if they're dead, or maybe I've got that reversed. I know that white is like a mourning color in other cultures, some other cultures. They also do a thing like they have a tomb sweeping day in some Asian cultures, and they will a lot of things where, like if you're in Hawaii and you see a tombstone and it has a jug of water next to it, that's so that you can wash the stone, which isn't something that we do in a lot of other cultures. There are different symbols you see, and that is one thing I do say, that just because something's written in stone doesn't mean it's written in stone. And by that, I mean, you have to take the context. Oh, here's a good example. Let's say you are in a cemetery and you see a pitcher, like a pitcher of water on the headstone. Now, if you're in a Catholic or Protestant cemetery, that might mean that the person was involved. It's usually for a woman. It might mean that she was involved in the temperance movement. So she might have been like the axe wielding, don't drink kind of Carrie Nation sort of person. See what era she lived in. Could that have been it? But it stands for like a righteous woman in general, whether or not she was involved in the temperance movement. However, if you're standing in a Jewish cemetery, that could mean that they descended from the tribe of Levi, because the Levites had the right to wash the hands of the priests. So that's why you would see a pitcher. So there are a lot of, I do tell people, definitely pay attention to the context of time and belief, the context of belief as well, when you're in a cemetery to help hone in. It's just a fun puzzle too. And people can just put something on their headstone because they just think it's cool. And that's more what we do today. In the past, I think people were more in touch with symbolic, the idea of being symbolic. I think they probably were better at interpreting their dreams. I think they were more in touch with that back then. Nowadays we're so literal. Grandpa liked tractors. I'm going to put a tractor on his grave. I mean, if or like Or like Aunt Madge likes squirrels. I'm putting a squirrel on her thing. But I mean, in the world of symbols, I haven't seen this on a grave, but 200 years ago or whatever, or an artwork, like actually a squirrel with an acorn that stands for like meditation on, because like, acorn stands for faith, because a little great big oak can grow from that little. Once again, it's just not, so but I mean, nowadays I see little, squirrel toys, and I know they're not thinking like, oh yes, she was really a meditator and she was meditating on faith. No, it just means like she likes squirrels. So you gotta think about that. There's a lot of that. And I think we have lost something though. I think we have gotten way literal, even though we have emojis and all this and a little mini thing, they are all literal. I think we are missing something there. And we're not as in touch to the poetic, like these epitaphs from the past were very poetic. Right. And just in general, people used to study poetry and not think it was a waste of time. And I think they were more tuned to the just symbolic. I think we look at the past and we kind of think people back in those days were dumb because they didn't have penicillin or something, But I think we are dumb in some ways as well. Sure, we got some great advancements, but I think we also missed something. So it really appeals to me, like maybe tapping into their headspace.
I completely agree with what you just said. Okay, last thing. We've been talking for I've been echoing for 56 minutes.
Oh, you poor thing. And I'm surprised the cat, she's just out of the frame. She's just kind of doing that stare at me thing. I'm like, stop it.
All right, last thing, symbolism. Gargoyles and demons on stones and that sort of.
Oh, we have them all over our house, actually, because our house looks like you're not going to see, I mean, I've seen more modern people who are goth. We do stuff now when we have something like a skull and a crossbone or it's because we're trying to be badass. Whereas like, if you look back to the Puritans, they had some stuff on there. If you travel to the East Coast, you're going to see skull and crossbones. I've seen this a lot in England and Europe as well. And you'll see even like a little Grim Reaper dude with like a pike to stab you and go, hey, you're going to die, and it'll say memento mori, which means remember you must die. That kind of stuff. And that's not meant to be like demonic, or it's not meant to say that these people were less than holy. It's just, it was a way to say like, yeah, they had such a dire outlook before the Victorian era and before the Civil War. It kind of morphs. So in my book, I actually talk about a morphing from how the Puritans had the skull and crossbones, and then it became a death's head, where you see a head with wings, and that's a softening of the imagery. And then by the time you get to the Victorian era, you suddenly have cherubs, which are so cute, So there's but that was all sort of a similar progression. So yeah, I guess I've never really seen any demons or anything on there. I have seen some pretty scary imagery. Like I have this wonderful photo I took in Barcelona of the Kiss of Death, and it's an angel of death. Oh gosh, I wish I could show you a picture of it right now. It's really great. I've sold prints of it before. It's just a really neat statue. But yeah, I mean, I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. And so what do you got going on? What's your next event, and what's your next book?
Well, I've got a couple more. If you go to my website and you go to my events page, you can see what's coming up. I know I've got a few more things. I'm going to be on Teal Gray's Mysteries the first and third Wednesday of each month, just with a little segment to either tell a cemetery tale or talk about a symbol, something fun like that. I've got that coming on. I'm going to be on Good Morning Texas on October 30th. If anyone watches Good Morning Texas, I know you're kind of from all over there. It's a TV show around here. And my next book, it's hard to say. I never know what my next book is going to be. I always have several going, and it's sort of whichever one makes it to the head, to the finish line. I have been working really hard on a book about the 1897 airship mysteries in Texas. Because once again, I actually thought this was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. And now, 8 years later, I'm still obsessively researching it. So I'm like, okay, just write a book already. Because I gave a talk at the International UFO Congress last year on this. And
I can assure you, Lynn and I will buy that book, because that's one of our we have to get to Aurora.
You do? Oh, wait, let me know. I'm only about 20 minutes away. Let me know.
Okay.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, so that one has to come out at some point. And yeah, so I always have lots of projects going. I don't really know which one's coming out next.
Thank you so much for spending your evening with us and talking with us. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, thank you. This was a blast, and you have such a friendly audience. I've been trying to keep up, but I haven't too much. But anyway.
Well, if you want to check out Facebook later and answer any of their questions,
Oh, that's a good idea.
And I hope to see you in Jefferson very soon.
I hope so.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's right. Take care.
Thank you so much again for coming in, and I hope to see you.
And thanks everybody for all your great
See you
questions.
later.
Bye.
All right. So that was my friend Tui Snider. She is awesome. She is a researcher and a lecturer and an author, and she knows more about cemetery symbology and that sort of stuff than anybody I know in the business. So if you have not read any of her books, 6 Feet Under Texas, you can get, if you go to her website, or I'm sure that you can also probably go to Amazon maybe and find it there. That sounds like it's pretty interesting. I'm sure Lynn has probably already ordered it while we're sitting here talking. Also, she has the one that's my favorite is the cemetery symbols. I've used many, many times, and the many meanings of hands in historic cemeteries, which I just think this stuff is absolutely fascinating. My brother Bill used to torture me and throw me on his motorcycle, and we would go riding around when I was like 5 and he was 17 years old. And we would go to these cemeteries and look at all this stuff, and it was just amazing to me. If you guys haven't ever watched Jeff Belanger's Speakeasy, make sure you tune in. He's on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and he always has really, really interesting, good guests on there, and it's a lot of fun, and it gives you a reason to crack open an adult beverage. Also, if you haven't ever listened to the podcast, The Creaking Door, that's a buddy of mine, Brad Blair. Couldn't remember his name. Brad Blair up in Michigan runs the Michigan Paracon, which will be coming up. We're crossed our fingers on the 2021 Michigan Paracon. It's going to be awesome. And also check out Seth Breedlove's Small Town Monsters and all of his documentaries that he does. Thanks so much for you guys. If you enjoyed this, other than the echo, please go down, click like. If you could share this, it would be really awesome. And I really appreciate all of you who watched and participated. And I hope to see you next Tuesday when Kat Ward from Australia is going to be on. And we're going to talk about ghosts in Australia. Love you guys. See you soon.